Chapter 1. The Soundless Shock. It began without a sound. No alarm. No flash. Just a shift. In the pre-dawn stillness of the Atacama Desert, Dr. Elise Navarro watched seismic readings jitter across her laptop screen like panicked insects. She blinked, refreshed the data, and stared again. There it was. A sudden harmonic tremor with no local epicenter. It registered globally, pulsing through the Earth's crust like a deep, bone-vibrating drumbeat. At the same moment, half a world away, retired astronaut Commander Vincent Rhodes sat alone on the rooftop of his rural Montana cabin, his telescope aimed casually at the moon. He had no reason to expect anything unusual, but as he adjusted focus, he saw it. A fracture, a hair-thin line across the sea of tranquility, glinting oddly in the light. He thought it was a trick of the lens. It wasn't. Within the hour, people across continents began reporting strange phenomena. Oceans withdrew unnaturally, then returned in towering walls. Birds flew in confused circles, and compasses spun without cause. Something had shifted. Something planetary. Something wrong. Elise's phone rang. The call was from Geneva, from a former colleague at the European Space Agency. He didn't say hello. He only whispered, "The moon split." Chapter 2. Tidal Rebellion. By midday, the oceans had lost their rhythm. Tide charts became meaningless. Coastal cities from Lagos to Miami reported water levels oscillating in chaotic pulses. In some regions, high tide surged 3 times in a single afternoon. In others, the sea seemed to retreat entirely, only to return with unforgiving speed. Boats rested on dry harbor floors in Chile, while waves devoured beach towns in Indonesia. Elise, summoned by a UN geophysical crisis team, stood in the Situation Room in Geneva. On a central screen, a simulation played on loop. The gravitational lock between Earth and its satellite, once stable for eons, had begun to unravel. The moon's fracture had altered its mass distribution, an asymmetry no one could have predicted. Worse, it was still shifting. "We're seeing signs of internal mass displacement," one analyst murmured, "as if something inside the moon is moving." Elise thought of hollow shells, of core displacements, of seismic voids. None of it made sense. Not yet. Vincent, meanwhile, sat before a bank of amateur equipment. Old NASA readouts, radio scanners, even a dusty lunar atlas. What he noticed chilled him to the bone. Tiny, sharp pulses of electromagnetic interference were emanating from the lunar scar, growing stronger by the hour. They weren't natural. They were repeating. Somewhere deep within the moon, something had awakened, and it was broadcasting. Chapter 3. Oscillation Protocol. In a hidden lab beneath the Swiss Alps, the emergency convening of the Planetary Oscillation Task Force had begun, an obscure team buried in bureaucracy, resurrected only in times of cosmic instability. Elise had been flown in by private jet, briefed mid-air by a physicist whose hands never stopped trembling. The briefing was simple. The moon is no longer in synchronous rotation. Its rotational velocity was changing, subtly, erratically. The same face had always looked down on Earth. Now, over the course of 36 hours, that face had shifted 3 degrees. Something inside was moving the moon from within, not just breaking its shell, but altering its entire behavior. Simultaneously, Vincent had his own breakthrough. Running spectral analysis on the EM pulses, he noticed that they weren't just repeating, they were harmonizing, like chords, musical intervals. He transcribed them, converting the waveforms into audible tones. What emerged was a low, resonant hum with a disquieting quality, as if echoing through metal from some great depth. He looped the sound, layered it. The result resembled not randomness, but architecture. A structure was forming from sound alone. Back in Geneva, Elise began tracing gravitational modeling simulations, overlaying new tidal behavior against lunar motion and ancient resonance patterns buried in the geologic record. That's when she found it. An anomaly, 3.2 billion years old, embedded in a zircon sample, long dismissed as an error in isotopic alignment. But it wasn't an error. It was the same tone. The moon had sung once before, and something on Earth had recorded it. Chapter 4. The Shell Theory. It was Vincent who voiced the forbidden hypothesis, quietly, and only once. The moon might not be natural. He was met with silence. Then, Elise replied, "Go on." They sat together for the first time in decades, surrounded by geological maps, seismic logs, and ancient lunar mission data that had been quietly declassified. Her fingers traced fault lines. His eyes scanned orbital anomalies. Slowly, a pattern emerged, a history of impossible echoes beneath the moon's surface, metal-like resonance during Apollo impacts, deep voids that reflected no seismic return, magnetic fields in areas where there should be none. What if the moon was never a solid body? What if it was a shell? In a darkened lab, a 3D projection showed it, a rough schematic of the moon with the recent fracture mapped in high detail. It wasn't random. The crack followed a curve, too precise. It looped around a polar region in a spiral, resembling not tectonic stress but design, a structural seam. And then came the kicker, a probe in lunar orbit, launched 5 years ago and long thought dead, came back online. Just once. A signal. A single transmission burst. Inside that packet was an image. Blurry, infrared filtered and quickly distorted by magnetic interference. But what it showed was unmistakable. A glowing geometry beneath the lunar surface, slowly rising. It wasn't just a crack. It was an opening. Chapter 5. Echoes Beneath the Crust. The Earth began to speak. At first, it was mistaken for seismic noise, subtle quakes with no epicenter. But the patterns were too precise, too rhythmic. Elise received spectrograph data from a deep Earth observatory in Finland, where underground sensors recorded something unlike anything in geological history. Sound waves echoing upward from deep within the mantle, tonal, deliberate, encoded. "It's like the planet is responding," she said aloud, not to anyone in particular. Vincent, meanwhile, was hundreds of meters below the Nevada desert in a forgotten Cold War acoustic chamber reactivated by emergency protocol. He ran the lunar harmonics against historical geosonic data and found a match. Only once before had the Earth produced this tone, approximately 3.7 billion years ago. This wasn't a warning. It was a memory surfacing. New satellite imaging revealed vast patches of crust, deforming into strange, geometric undulations, impossible shapes resembling glyphs, spirals, and fractals, too precise to be random. In one site, a desert plateau near Chad rose overnight by 8 meters in a perfect hexagonal bloom. It was happening globally. The moon's fracture wasn't just an outward crisis. It had triggered a deep planetary reawakening, something older than civilization, older than biology. Buried beneath the crust, something was hearing the moon again and answering. Elise stared at a live seismic map. The points of resonance were aligning, not randomly, symmetrically. Chapter 6. The Moon Seed. In a bunker beneath Greenland's melting permafrost, a new signal came through. This time not from the moon, but from the Earth. Deep borehole sensors, remnants of Cold War listening projects, had detected a synchronized response, a pulse. Every time the moon emitted a harmonic tone, Earth echoed back, subtly, as if acknowledging an ancient command. Elise stared at the waveforms side by side. It was not a reflection. It was a dialogue. "Are they communicating?" someone asked. "No," Vincent murmured. "They're completing a circuit." Back in orbit, the reactivated lunar probe sent one final data burst before failing permanently. It showed internal motion inside the moon, geometric plates unlocking, folding inward. Beneath them, a glowing seed-like structure with petal-like protrusions, slowly blooming as radiation and magnetism spiked. It wasn't a reactor. It wasn't biological. It was preparatory. Elise and Vincent stood together in a silent realization. The moon was not just a shell. It was a vessel, a containment field. And now, it was hatching. Around the world, animals began to migrate in strange patterns. Whales breached in unison. Birds spiraled over magnetic nodes. Deep in the Mariana Trench, hydrophones picked up a sound, a low, rising chord matching the lunar frequency. Human civilization had disrupted the moon's prison, and now Earth was preparing for its guest. Chapter 7. Harmonic Convergence. The world began to hum, not metaphorically, but literally. A low, almost inaudible vibration permeated everything. Glassware trembled faintly on countertops. Dogs barked at empty corners. Power grids fluctuated without cause. Some reported vivid dreams filled with geometric symbols, spirals, and strange music. The atmosphere felt tuned. In Geneva, Elise ran acoustic resonance tests on ancient rock samples collected from impact craters, monoliths, even coral reefs. All responded to the moon's new frequency. Some began to emit subtle glows under specific harmonic exposure. Vincent focused on the waveform data. He noticed a convergence, a precise harmonic interval occurring across solar, magnetic, and biological systems. It wasn't random. It was a countdown. "We're not just experiencing a phenomenon," he said to Elise. "We're inside a mechanism." Meanwhile, synchronized events unfolded across the planet. In Turkey, an underground chamber opened beneath Göbekli Tepe after being sealed for over 10,000 years. In Japan, monks at Mount Koya heard gongs ring without striking them. In the Amazon, tribes gathered at stone circles long forgotten, guided by instinct alone. The convergence had begun, and in orbit, satellites detected a massive gravitational ripple moving outward from the moon, touching the Earth, and continuing beyond. Not a weapon, not an attack. A signal, old as time, finally completing its loop. Chapter 8. The Gravity Bloom. Gravity lost its grip. Not entirely, but enough to make the world feel subtly wrong. Skyscrapers creaked as their load shifted. Rivers reversed momentarily. Planes had to adjust for invisible eddies. Children tossing balls into the air watched them linger just a second too long. The moon, now visibly open to the naked eye, pulsed like a heartbeat. With each slow throb, a gravitational bloom expanded outward, distorting the field between it and Earth in complex, wave-like patterns. Satellites in low orbit began to drift off course, caught in invisible tides. One experimental station meant for microgravity experiments suddenly accelerated toward the Pacific, its final transmission a garbled mess of harmonic distortion and static. Elise called it a gravity bloom, an alien energy event where mass was no longer static but rhythmically oscillating. Earth's crust groaned in response. Volcanoes showed signs of resurgence. Fault lines buzzed, but it wasn't chaos. It was coordination. At the CERN facility, dormant detectors, once tuned to the elusive graviton, began picking up something new, a frequency not seen before. Not noise. Instruction. The moon was not attacking. It was broadcasting. Terraforming, not Earth, but its laws. Vincent stared at the display and whispered what both of them feared. It's rewriting the operating system. Chapter 9. The Signal. Architects. Elise had never believed in anything mystical. Patterns, yes. Probabilities. Structures. But now, in the face of planetary resonance and gravitational bloom, she found herself staring at something else entirely. Design. Vincent had pieced it together from overlapping ancient myths, geometric symbols, and recently activated deep core sensors. The same shapes appeared everywhere: spirals, hexagrams, concentric nodes, etched into stone temples, encoded in ice strata, and now blooming across satellite telemetry as if the Earth itself were revealing buried circuitry. "These aren't side effects," he said. "They're blueprints." Global agencies scrambled to keep pace. In Peru, a Nazca line began to flicker under satellite scans, emitting faint microwave patterns. In Siberia, a lake frozen for millennia thawed in a perfect spiral, its waters steaming with luminescent algae. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid began resonating, not visibly, but audibly, vibrating at a frequency no instrument could explain. And beneath all of it, hidden in tectonic data, atmospheric pulses, and echoing harmonics, was one truth. The moon's shell was a transmitter. It was never meant to contain a prisoner. It was designed to awaken the Earth itself, not terraform it, but activate it. The signal wasn't for us. It was from us, millennia ago, locked in celestial time delay, waiting for a realignment, waiting for Earth to be ready to remember what it had once known. Elise looked at the shifting magnetic bands on her screen and felt a chill. Someone, or something, left instructions. Chapter 10. The Return of the Architects. It happened just past midnight UTC. The moon pulsed, once, then again. A slow, deliberate heartbeat of light and force. All global telemetry paused for 0.02 seconds. Then it resumed, subtly altered. Something had arrived. Elise watched in stunned silence as a waveform emerged from the moon's fractured core, tight, clean, and fractal. It was not a message. It was a signature. Across the sky, auroras bloomed far beyond the poles, dancing in equatorial skies, writhing like luminous vines. In ancient temples and high-frequency observatories, something shifted. Stone vibrated. Metal warmed. Then the sightings began. Not of ships, not of beings, but of shapes. Vast, luminous geometries hovering in the upper atmosphere, perfectly still, casting no shadow, emitting no sound. In Cairo, a tetrahedron. Over the Pacific, a spiral. In Iceland, a floating glyph, a looping Ouroboros of radiant lattice. They were not vehicles. They were keys, projected into our dimension from the signal architecture. Each one hovered above a sacred site, resonating with the ancient blueprints encoded in the Earth. Vincent stared up at the Icelandic glyph, visible even from his position in Norway, and whispered, "They're not coming. They were always here." The architects had returned, not as beings of flesh, but as systems reactivating. Conscious infrastructure woven into space-time itself. The moon was never a satellite. It was a starter switch. Chapter 11. The Pulse of Memory. All around the world, people began to remember things that never happened. They were memories, but not theirs. Dreams of walking on crystalline bridges beneath alien moons, of speaking languages formed from light and breath. Children awoke in tears, whispering glyphs in ancient tones. The elderly, once confused, stared skyward with sudden clarity. The architect's signal had done more than awaken Earth's systems. It was awakening its inhabitants. Elise was among them. She no longer needed instruments to feel the signal. It pulsed in her blood, in her bones. In her sleep, she saw vast machinery orbiting red suns, machines not made of steel, but of symphonic frequencies. And in every vision, the cracked moon was there, whole again. Not broken, but open, its core spinning like a memory drum. Vincent realized the truth first. Humanity was not just receiving a signal. They were the signal, encoded, dormant, waiting for the bloom. The shapes in the sky were changing too. The tetrahedron over Cairo was now unfolding, revealing an inner matrix of shifting planes. The Ouroboros in Iceland had sunk into the earth, leaving behind strange plant life that grew in fractal spirals overnight. Elise ran a simulation. If the harmonic wave continued its trajectory, all DNA on Earth, plant, animal, human, would experience a phase shift, not death. Integration. The architects weren't returning to rule. They were returning to remember, through us. Chapter 12. Threshold Earth. By the seventh day, the Earth no longer felt like Earth. The oceans shimmered with patterns only visible under certain frequencies. Mountains that had slept for millennia began humming, low, resonant tones echoing through bedrock. Trees no longer bent solely to wind, but subtly adjusted to unseen gravitational waves. The world had become a sensorium, an interface. Vincent stood on the rim of an extinct volcano in Ethiopia, watching geometric storm systems swirl across the atmosphere. He held an old compass in his hand. It spun constantly now, like a child's toy, utterly useless. But he didn't need direction. He could feel it. An inward draw, a point of convergence not on a map, but in meaning. A harmonic attractor. Elise had reached the ruins of Nan Model in the Pacific, where the basalt structures, long thought to be the remnants of a forgotten civilization, had begun to levitate, stone by stone, rearranging themselves into complex grids aligned with the moon's frequency. In the ruin's center was a platform now glowing with shifting sigils, none carved by hand, all lit from within. Then the sky changed again. The moon pulsed once more, but this time, the fracture collapsed inward, folding into a black core that didn't reflect light. A void. And from it came a final burst, a waveform so precise, so pure, that it reset every machine on Earth. Clocks stopped. Phones rebooted. GPS satellites blinked out, then back in, with new coordinates. Not in kilometers or latitude, in tones. A new grid was forming, not on Earth, but through it. The planet had become a conduit, a gate. Threshold Earth had been crossed. The moon was no longer a symbol of night. It was a keyhole, and Earth had just turned the lock. Chapter 13. The Earth Resonant. By now, Earth's electromagnetic field no longer resembled a planetary shield. It pulsed like an organ. The magnetosphere had reshaped into petal-like layers, rotating in synchrony with the moon's collapsed core. Space telescopes captured breathtaking frames, auroras stretching into space like vines, looping across orbital paths, responding to some internal tempo. A planetary chrysalis. Earth was no longer inert. It was resonant. In the Amazon, entire groves of trees began glowing faintly at night, their leaves vibrating at ultrasonic frequencies. In the Sahara, buried stone chambers unearthed themselves through harmonic tremors. And in the Arctic, ancient icebergs split open, not from melting, but in exact geometric fractures, revealing metallic crystalline structures inside. Vincent met Elise at Lake Baikal, where water, usually placid and ancient, now swirled in slow, hexagonal patterns. They said nothing for a long time. Then Vincent murmured, "It's not just us adapting to the signal." Elise nodded. "It's adapting to us." The architects had left no physical form behind, only code, seated in matter and field. But the moon's unlocking had changed the rules. Human thoughts, dreams, even feelings were beginning to shape the resonance back. People dreamed of places they'd never been, and the land changed to match. Forgotten temples reappeared in satellite scans. Whole mountain ranges shifted half a degree, aligning to stars no longer in our sky. It was Earth, but more responsive, more aware. A mirror in motion. The resonance wasn't an endpoint. It was a dialogue, one the moon had waited to restart for eons. Chapter 14. The architects remembered across the earth. Silence fell, not from absence, but from fullness. Everything resonated with a low, omnipresent harmony. Not music, not sound, but the feeling of sound, as though the very atoms of air and stone were tuned to some sacred chord. People stopped speaking. There was no need. Understanding had arrived. Elise stood in the Himalayas, staring at an impossibility. A mountain summit that had shifted shape overnight, forming a perfect spiral ridge, carved into its newly exposed face. Glyphs identical to those she had once dreamt, but she had never carved them. Someone else had. Or some older version of her. She realized then that the architects were not gods or aliens or external creators. They were us. Before the fall, before forgetting, before Earth became locked in the cycle of amnesia. The moon had been their fail-safe, a container for the memory of what humanity had once been. And now, that memory had been returned, not in history books or ancient ruins, but in the living Earth itself, in neural pathways lighting up with unfamiliar fluency, in coral reefs forming phrases in light, in the pyramids, humming with harmonic balance once again. At Lake Baikal, Vincent stood waist-deep in freezing water, arms raised. He was not cold. Around him, the lake glowed. The sky pulsed in gentle breaths. He whispered a single word, untranslatable, primal, and all around him, light bowed in response. The architects were no longer returning. They were reawakening, inside every human, every creature, every leaf. The moon had split, but it was not a wound. It was a mirror, finally turned back to face us. Chapter 15. A world rewritten in light. It did not end with fire or collapse. It ended with remembering. And in that remembering, something new began. The Earth now spun not just on its axis, but within a lattice of harmonic fields that linked oceans to skies, minds to stars. Weather responded to thought. Light curved differently. Even gravity, once so firm and predictable, now danced to a subtler rhythm. Elise stood atop the reorganized summit of Mount Kailash, no longer capped in ice, but in crystalline terraces, humming softly. Below her, villages moved as one, not under command, but under intuition. Humanity had not vanished. It had awakened. Children were born already aware of the patterns. They could sing to water and shape it. They could close their eyes and see a world not in objects, but in fields of intention and resonance. Architecture grew from seeded forms. Cities no longer pierced the sky. They harmonized with it. Vincent had gone to the dark places, deep caves, oceanic trenches, the moon's orbit itself, and found only echoes, not of monsters or gods, but of previous versions of us, of humanity written, erased, rewritten again, and now, finally, stabilized. No one controlled this world, not even the architects, because the architects were gone. They had passed the torch, to Earth itself, to us. And in the final sky, where the moon had once glowed broken and hollow, now hovered a single spiral of silver-blue light. Not an object, not a machine, a memory, a gift, a mirror, for those who choose to look up and remember.